From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
We know the technology for cloning has existed for, some time. We've got, Dolly the sheep and all that. Mm-hmm. It's certainly not as simple as like a cloning machine where you just step inside and then all of a sudden like a laser shoots into another identical cloning machine and then another version of you walks out, fully formed. That is not how that works. It requires a lot of trial and error. It's very expensive and can take many years to clone. And that's even today with, the advances in technology. And like any expensive technology, it's finally found its way into the hands of social media influencers, which is always fun. Specifically, something called pet fluencers, which I guess there's every kind of fluencer you can imagine. These are pet influencers. These are folks whose bread and butter is to, pose on Instagram with their pets and like lifestyle kind of pet, related stuff. For
like
example,
Grumpy Cat?
That would be a little different, I think. So these are a little more specifically like, they're like social media influencers who pose with their pets a lot. Grumpy Cat's sort of its own thing. I don't know if that would count as a pet influencer. I think the pet influencer is the person, and then the pet is like part of that kind of duo.
So it's not like a vanity account just for the pet, like Loki.
No, these are typically like folks that are all about like their life with their furry friend, like Udvar Hazy, for example, who's a 29-year-old pet influencer who has recently used a company out of Texas called Viagen to clone her dog Willow. You may have heard of Viagen in the past. They made the news when they created a clone of Barbara Streisand's dog Samantha back in 2018. Through this process, Udvar Hazy ended up with a clone of Willow by the name of Phoenix, plus 5 other completely identically genetical puppies that she was able to give away to her friends. There's a cool article on Input about this with the very clever headline, "Bring in the clones." Instagrammers are genetically replicating their pets. So here's the deal. Wander with Willow is the name of Udvar Hazy's Instagram account. And there, Ben, you make a good point. There is kind of a blurry line between whether it's, exclusively for the animal, or if it's more of kind of like a joint account. It does seem like a lot of the pictures on this account are the dog, but they post together quite a bit too. It's definitely more of a lifestyle thing than like a kooky looking pet, like a Grumpy Cat or Bingus, if anyone is familiar with the hairless, I believe Siamese cat Bingus, who's very memeable. My kid is obsessed, and I find it a little bit disturbing.
Yeah, hairless cats freak me out, man. I'm sure
they're just too pink. Yeah, it's too pink, and they just look like something's wrong. This one's pink.
I'm partially, I'm partially colorblind, so.
Oh, that's right.
To
Yes,
me, it looks like chicken skin. It's like when we saw the pictures of plucked ostriches. It's
100%. Not a great look. So this is becoming a thing. This is really like kind of picking up steam. Tinkerbell, who was a 5-pound papatisse, who had more than 500,000 followers on Instagram. The owner, or the team, I guess this pet has a team, revealed that in 2019, Tinkerbell's DNA was being collected and stored for potential cloning. Another account, I love the name of, I Party with Bruce Wayne, which has 55,000 followers. This one is all about this group of cloned Chihuahuas. And there's pictures of them all in like holiday sweaters, like all sitting together, and they are indeed identical. This probably goes without saying, but I just want to say it anyway. When you clone an animal, it's not like you're reincarnating it. Like if your animal has died and you've saved this material and you go through the process of creating the clone, it's almost more akin to like in vitro fertilization than it is some sort of magical, like reproduction process. So your pet it's going to look the same. It's going to be genetically identical, but it's not like it's all of a sudden going to have the exact same personality as your pet that passed. Melaine Rodriguez, who is a client services manager at Viagen, makes this point. Just to make sure that people understand what they're getting into. And she makes the point in the input article that, this is in many ways used by very wealthy people who are having a hard time coping, with the loss of a pet. This is a way that many of them are able to kind of like move forward. But then she does note that the pets aren't reincarnations, like I said before, that they're going to have different personalities than the one that they were cloned from. This is very, very expensive, by the way. Each clone costs between $35,000 and $50,000, and that depends a lot on the animal. And then Rodriguez describes the process like this. The eggs and the embryos are created in a dish and then transferred into the surrogate. If you ever had a wonderful pet that you love so much, it's so hard to lose them. A lot of our clients are in that situation. And as we know, a lot of Instagram influencers are quite wealthy, whether they were already wealthy, and that's sort of how they came to become Instagram influencers. That's often the case. Or many of them hustled and absolutely scrapped and earned their followership from scratch and maybe didn't come from wealth. And that's absolutely part of this too. Kelly Anderson is another pet owner and pet influencer. And she's a dog trainer, and she had a cat named Chai, who she described as being her soulmate, and had obviously many folks have incredibly close connections to their pets, and losing a pet is in many ways as painful as losing any other loved one. And she did the cloning in order to help her, cope, because she actually was so distraught that she wasn't able to continue doing what she normally would do. And she is one who, she says in the article that she built up her 64,000 strong followership just kind of by being scrappy and resourceful. But when her cat died, she wasn't able to continue. And that was kind of like a real problem for her.
Let me ask this, because now, not to be too much of a caricature of myself, but I'm pretty cynical with some of these cases. So I was also looking up on the Viagen website. I was reading some of their information. And at some point, for at least some of these accounts, we're talking about a business decision, at least in part. You're making your income off of this. That range of pricing is like 50 grand for a dog, 35 for a cat, which is interesting. And then there's a lot of interest in horse cloning, because that can make a ton of money. But I can see this absolutely just being a reasonable investment. The petfluencer says, I have struck lightning in a bottle here, or whatever figure of speech I'm muddling. And they say, I need, Rupert Goldie Toes, or whatever their dog's name is, to live forever so that I can continue my career as a pet influencer. Then I'll have Goldie Toes too. Like I'm not saying this means they don't deeply care for their animals, but I'm saying at some point it's inseparable. Like 500,000 followers, and it's dependent upon the popularity of an animal that will naturally expire before the human owner does.
That's right. And you could probably, even if your cloned animal doesn't have the exact same temperament or personality, a lot of this is pictures and stills and stuff. And unless your animal's known for doing some kind of wacky trick or something like that, a lot of it is just about the look of the animal. And so this is an opportunity that Viagen saw and is seizing on. Rodriguez wouldn't go into specifics, about how many pet fluencers are doing this specifically, for the business side of it, but it clearly is something that they're considering because they go to all of these conferences. I could picture them having a booth at like a pet fluencer conference, and she asks the question: if someone made a living off of their pet and then suddenly the pet's gone, what do you do then? And apparently, this is something that very much resonated with the folks that are going to these conferences. So there's definitely that, but it also points out the article that it's not an easy process for the surrogate And as we know, it can take many years with many, trials and errors. So I don't know what that means. If that means that some of these attempts are like failing, or that they're like not. Is it something where you could potentially generate, a clone that then dies, or is in some way genetically unstable and has some sort of horrible condition, is in pain? Like, how many failed attempts do you have to, go through to make a viable clone? And do these failed attempts involve pain for the animals? I don't know. And if anyone out there is in genetics and knows a little more about that, I'm interested, because they don't talk about that. This isn't something, they don't really tell you how the sausage is made exactly. So I've got to wonder, if some of these aren't viable and it takes that long, how many, and I'm not trying to be macabre about it, but it makes me think of, like, body horror sci-fi type stuff like Cronenberg, where you maybe have like monstrosity or something, like that maybe is in some way, like in pain and shouldn't exist. I don't know if that's the case, and I'm sorry if I'm being alarmist or extreme.
Yeah, I think you're
where my imagination's going, but I have to imagine that's a possibility, because
all I know is that the fine folks at Viagen, or whatever it is, they're asking for roughly the annual salary of most of us to make a clone of a pet.
Right, which is it's like more expensive than some very high-end cars. It's what people make in a year. That number doesn't count sales tax, which further the expense makes me further convinced that in many cases this is a business move. I think there's something else that's really dangerous about this that people haven't talked about, and I know some of us listening today are thinking the exact same thing. Is this so different from cloning a deceased loved one or human relative? Currently, I don't know whether this is good news or bad news to everybody, but currently it is illegal to quote, knowingly clone people. So you could make a case, if you're somehow a geneticist, you could make a case where you say, Your Honor, was I upset about the death of my human loved one? Yes. But I did not know I was making a clone. I clearly am smart enough to do it, and this new person is alive, but it was my bad. It was an accident. Like, how does that hold up in court? I mean, people would do it though, if it was legal, right? Like, if Viagen could clone humans legally, why not do it? Some other business would.
But do they? I don't understand. Like, they would have to clone like a baby, right? I mean, it's not like they would. It would be an embryo, and you have to go through the whole life cycle to get the person back to the age that you remembered them, and it would be a whole other life. It's not like you can't clone their brain. I mean, you can't clone their fully formed memories and their brain and all that. I mean, there's so much weird Black Mirror rabbit holing to do with that scenario. With animals, it's a little different. But it's not that different. Not to mention, something that Input points out that I really agree with, is that this is kind of, you could argue, pretty decadent when there are, 6.5 roughly million animals in shelters, Why not just carry on the memory of your beloved pet and give that love to another animal that needs a home?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you're saying that we could have another Robin Williams in like 30 years, like if we started right now, we cloned him, I'll take it. Let's do it.
That's the thing. There is some decadence. While it's maybe not an expense that I myself would undertake, I have a tough time telling people what to do with their own money. You know what I mean? Like, if you own horses, of course, you're inevitably going to consider the breeding racing business. So paying $85,000 to clone an animal that has already made you millions, that just makes sense,
It makes a lot of sense in that department. You're right, especially because I think I maybe mentioned this back when I was a reporter for public radio. In Augusta, where I worked, where my bureau was, we have this thing called the Futurity. It's like a big horse trading kind of like rodeo type event, and I went to an auction, for breeding rights for these horses, and they literally auction off semen.
Yeah,
of the came from a prized winning racehorse. So how is this any different than that? It's just like the next level of that. So that's an interesting point.